Hello, and welcome to Wildwestfaces. Today's story talks about an Indian chief by the name of Black Horse. Him and his people were on a reservation in Fort Sill. Well, he had to ask permission of the soldiers to be able to go and hunt buffalo. This griped him pretty bad, and can't say I blame him. But he went through the necessary requirements, asked permission, and got permission to go and hunt buffalo. But when he got there, he ended up finding many of the buffalo slaughtered by other buffalo hunters. This was more than he could take, and he decided to take revenge. Listen to this exciting story here on Wild West Faces. In 1876, Comanche war chief Black Horse and his band of Comanche had to go through the humiliation of having to apply for a permit to leave the reservation and hunt buffalo in Texas. The Indian agent at Fort Sill in Indian country granted the permit, but Black Horse felt great resentment at having to ask these newcomers for permission to go and hunt in his own homeland. Black Horse and his band set off from Fort Sill. They made their way to Garza County near the head of the Salt Fork of the Brazos River. A buffalo hunter named Sewell and several of his buffalo skinner companions had beat them to the hunting ground. Black Horse and his warriors watched from a distant ridge as Sewell picked off buffalo with his Sharps rifle. The buffalo herd stayed put as one by one they dropped. After running out of ammunition, Sewell packed up and started off to his camp to fetch the wagon and let the skinners know more buffalo were ready. As Sewell rode up over a low ridge, he came face to face with Black Horse and his warriors. The hunter swung his horse around, but he found the Comanche warriors were already behind him. They swept down on him and knocked him off his horse. While warriors held his arms, another slowly sliced open his stomach. The other skinners saw the commotion from over a mile away and took off at a gallop to Rath's trading post for help. When the skinners got back, with around 50 men, they rode up to the scene of the murder. The grass all around was trampled flat and was red with blood. Sewell was on his back, his clothing had been ripped off, his scalp was missing, and his rifle tripod was sticking out of the large hole in his stomach. He had been butchered on the prairie like one of the many buffalo he had just killed. The Texans saw the fresh pony tracks from the murder scene and followed the Comanche band. There was a brief clash between the two sides before the skinners and men thought that discretion is the better part of valor and left the dangerous Comanches for the safety of the trading post. Black Horse, now emboldened by his win against the whites, began raiding other hunters' camps in the region, one belonging to Pat Garrett, the man that would later shoot Billy the Kid dead. A white man was spotted amongst the Comanche raiders, dressed like a warrior. He fought alongside the Comanches. This was Herman Lehman, the white child captive who became a Comanche warrior. After the raids, the militia from Rath's decided to hunt Black Horse and his warriors until they were killed or captured. It became known as the Staked Plains War or the Hunters' War. The men tracked the Indians to Yellow House Canyon. The scouts thought that Black Horse would be hiding here, and they proceeded with caution. A Comanche sentry was seen by the scouts and killed before he could raise the alarm. The men continued carefully into the canyon, and before long, they could see the teepees of Black Horse in the distance. Although it was now afternoon and the best time to attack being dawn, the men decided to attack the village at this time before they were discovered. The men made a hasty plan of attack. Two groups would head up each side of the canyon on horseback, while another group of men would creep up the creek on foot, hoping to surprise the Comanches. When the men in the creek were close enough that they could hear voices, they charged up the steep bank and attacked the edge of the camp, firing their Winchesters into the teepees as they went. To the attackers' complete surprise, Comanche women came rushing at them with revolvers blazing, and the camp came alive like a hornet's nest, and the Texans were forced to make a fast-fighting withdrawal just to escape with their lives. They made their way out of the canyon with the Comanches taking shots at them at every turn. After making the plains, the men could plainly see the Comanche following just out of rifle distance. They disappeared just before dusk, but the men felt sure that they would see them again shortly. Heading towards Buffalo Springs, they traveled into the night and came to a halt where they built a large bonfire as if at camp. They then withdrew under darkness and took a roundabout way to Rath's. They limped into Rath's trading post with many wounded, one being shot in the gut who lived for an agonizing week before succumbing to his wound. The 10th Cavalry from Fort Griffin were sent out to find the renegade Comanche and track the band to Quemodo Lake in Cochran County. Here the Comanche were caught unaware and a couple were shot dead. Black Horse and the rest of the band surrendered and were escorted back to Fort Sill, where Black Horse and some warriors were then sent to Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida. His wife and daughter were allowed to join him, and they were not considered to be prisoners. He was released from prison just 3 years later and returned to the Comanche Reservation in Indian Territory in 1878.
A mining camp is made up of all classes of people and of all nationalities. Among those in the hills that are preeminently original is Calamity Jane, or Martha Canary. Born in the midst of the wild whirlwind of a dissolute life, thrown when a mere child upon the cold world for sustenance, uneducated, uncared for, with a mother incapacitated to love her, father dead, surrounded with sadness, Jane grew up among the tough and tumble of the world and is today what delicate society would denominate a strong-minded woman. She is about 22 years old, has a dark complexion, high cheekbones, an awkward walk, receding crow, black hair, rather pleasant eye, but when in passion emitting a greenish glare. Her movements are free and unstudied, yet in no sense unbecoming. Her conversation is animated, her language good, and her heart warming and generous. She imitates no one, is an original in herself, despises hypocrisy, and is easily moved to tears. She is generous, forgiving, kind-hearted, social, and yet when aroused, has all the daring and courage of the lion or the devil himself. She has been long in the hills, has been a scout in the army, dressed in soldier's clothes, traveled all over, scaled the mountains, rode horseback, fought Indians, and is now dancing in a hurdy-gurdy house in Deadwood for a living. When dressed in her own garments, she looks comely. When equipped as a man, she has all the characteristics of the sterner sex, with her pistols, bowie knives, and other weapons of death. Monteverde is a woman about 25 years old. She is probably the most gifted female in the hills, has a somewhat large figure, dark eyes, dark hair, is a most excellent dancer and singer, has a quiet, unostentatious way, yet fully self-possessed. On the stage, in the role of a comic dancer or songstress, she is greatly admired. In her original play of The Outcast, she is an excellent tragedienne and never fails to draw tears from her admirers. When she first arrived in the hills, she was carried on a board standing up on it, through the streets of Deadwood, borne on the shoulders of 4 men. She deals 21, sings, dances, plays excellently, and yet mingles in the rough crowd of the gambling saloon, and appears enchanted with her surroundings, and yet I am quite confident she longs for a higher and better life, which she could adorn with honor to herself and her sex. Nellie, in Deadwood Central, is one of the women in the hills. No female attracts so much attention as Nellie. Of course she is a gambler, and that here is not derogatory to one's character. In the ordinary proprieties of everyday life, you see nothing to find fault with. But when seated at the gaming table, surrounded with rough miners, Nellie looks her best and worst. Best by comparison, worst by her company. Not that her companions are bad, but the place, the scene, the game. But then, this is a free country. Nellie is only 21. Has a very interesting face, sparkling eye, a charming way with her. Her movements are graceful. Yet she loves the cards. Kitty Leroy, who was killed by her husband only a short time ago, who then killed himself, was of small figure and had previously been noted as a jig dancer. She had a large Roman nose, cold, gray eyes, a low, cunning forehead, and was inordinately fond of money. I saw her often in her mint, which was opposite my office, where men congregated to squander their money, and as Kitty was a good player, like the old gravedigger, she gathered them in. That is, their money. Men are, in a general sense, fools. A small tress of golden hair, or a bright eye, or a soft voice will precipitate them into the ocean of folly, and women of the world know this fact and play upon the weak string of men's hearts until all is gone, money, character, and even life. Kitty has seen much of human nature, entering upon her wild career at the age of 10. She was married 3 times and died at 28. He was doing well with his gold claim. She knew it. Like the spider, she spun her delicate web about him until he poured into her lap $8,000 in gold, and then, when his claim would yield no more, she beat him over the head with a bottle and drove him from her door. One and another she married, and then, when their money was gone, discarded them in rapid succession. Yet there was something peculiarly magnetic about Kitty. Men did love her, and there are men living today who love her money. Well, she's gone. I saw her only a short time since, lying dead, and the body of her inanimate husband, with whom the said she would not live, but with whom she was obliged to pass quickly to the grave. Charles Utter has been a noted scout on the frontier for many years. He is a singular-looking being, small in stature, with duck legs, thick-set body, long hair, which falls down over his shoulders, a mustache and goatee, strong features, a mild, pleasant eye, and his head capped by a broad-brimmed hat. There is no braggadocio in Utter. He has murdered no pard, but has killed and hunted Indians. He never drinks, but smokes constantly. When out of his particular line of business, he deals 21 and, of course, has his Jenny with him, who is as mild and pleasant a woman as Charlie is a man. Utter is very modest, hence newspaper correspondents don't write him up, otherwise he would be, and ought to be, famous among the scouts of the plains. Aunt Sally is a large Negro woman, almost as broad as she is long, now living in Crook City. She went out in Custer's first expedition and was with him when he first entered the hills. She is a walking encyclopedia of matters and facts connected with this country, and presents a very animated appearance when she rolls up her great white eyes, shows her beautiful teeth, and exclaims with earnestness and animation, the first white woman that ever entered the hills. Of course, it would be impolite in the presence of a lady to deny the soft impeachment, so I simply accepted the statement as in every sense true. The recent pardon of Martin L. Conk, serving a life sentence in the House of Correction at Detroit for the murder of Mrs. Collison at Deadwood in 1879, brings to memory the several remarkable features of the case. The murder was so revolting in its character, the victim being brained while asleep, as to create a good deal of excitement there. A disreputable Negro known as Nigger General was suspicioned of the foul deed and narrowly escaped lynching. Everybody felt that he ought to be hung on general principle, and his life was only saved by being placed in jail, where he was guarded for several weeks. Had the husband of the murdered woman, under the circumstances which surrounded the case, been in Deadwood on the night of the murder, there is but little doubt he would have been gobbled. He, however, proved an alibi, and then came Conk's and Mrs. Boughton's turn. The latter was acquitted, but Conk was sentenced to be hung. Obtaining a new trial, the sentence was modified to imprisonment for life, and now he is at liberty.